The blizzard swallowed the mountains whole. A retired SWAT officer thought isolation was safety, until his German shepherd froze at the door. 2 injured wolves stood in the storm, not hunting, not running, just waiting. He knew the rules of the wild. He knew the risk. Walking away would protect him. Staying would cost him something he wasn't ready to face. And in that silence, he realized winter wasn't done with him yet. Subscribe now and stay with this story, because what happens next changes everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please make sure to subscribe for more. Your support truly means the world. The wind had been rising since dusk, carrying needles of ice that scraped against the log cabin as if the mountain itself were testing its resolve. Robert Hale woke before the storm reached its worst. He always did. 63 years old, 6 feet tall though age had begun to bend him forward by a fraction, Robert moved with the careful economy of a man who knew exactly how many good motions his body still had left each day. His shoulders were broad but no longer square, his hands thick with old fractures that never fully healed. A jagged scar cut along the left side of his jaw, half hidden by a neatly trimmed gray beard, the kind a man keeps not for style but for discipline. His hair, once dark brown, was now steel gray, worn short and practical, as if he might still be called back into service at any moment, though he knew that call would never come. He lived alone in a weather-beaten cabin tucked deep into the Wyoming mountains, far from paved roads, farther still from people. The isolation was intentional. After 27 years in a SWAT unit, after doors kicked in, rooms cleared, men shouted down or carried out under sheets, silence had become something he needed the way others needed noise. The mountains did not ask questions. Snow did not care who you had been. Max rose the moment Robert swung his legs off the bed. The German shepherd was old, older than most working dogs ever got to be. Nearly 11 now, his once glossy black and tan coat dulled by years and weather, his muzzle frosted white as if the snow itself had claimed him early. His left ear no longer stood fully upright, the cartilage weakened by an injury sustained long ago during a warrant service gone wrong. Max moved stiffly at first, joints creaking like the cabin's floorboards, but his eyes remained sharp, dark, steady, and alert in a way that never truly faded. He had been a K-9 once, trained to read rooms, men, and danger before it announced itself. Retirement had slowed his body, not his instincts. Robert pulled on thick wool socks and an old flannel shirt, the fabric worn soft by years of use. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke, coffee grounds, and dog, comforting scents layered over solitude. Outside, the wind howled harder now, pushing against the windows with a low, persistent force. Robert paused, listening. That habit had never left him. In the city, it had been engines, sirens, radios. Here, it was wind, timber, and the deep, uneasy quiet that followed sudden changes in weather. Max stopped short near the front door. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply stood there, head low, body rigid, staring at the door as if it were transparent. Robert felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old reflex kicking in before thought had time to interfere. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, though he already knew the answer would not come in words. Max's tail was still, his breathing slow. This wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was attention, the kind that meant something was wrong. Robert reached for his coat and boots, movements deliberate. Outside, the temperature had dropped fast, the kind of cold that turned exposed skin numb in minutes. When he cracked the door open, the wind shoved against it, snow swirling into the entryway in a sudden white rush. Max stepped forward but did not cross the threshold, holding position like he had been trained to do years ago. Robert swept the beam of his flashlight across the porch. That was when he saw the tracks. They were fresh, pressed deep into the powder, but wrong. Too large for fox, too narrow and uneven for deer, not human, no heel, no tread, and yet not the clean, purposeful marks of a predator in pursuit either. These prints staggered, veering slightly, as if whatever made them had been fighting the wind more than following prey. Robert crouched despite the protest from his knee, bringing the light lower. His breath fogged the air as he studied the spacing, the drag marks. "You see it too," he said quietly, more to himself than to Max. Something had come close to the cabin, close enough to hesitate, close enough to linger. His first instinct was caution. His second was something older, heavier. In the city, desperation had a sound. Here, it had tracks. Robert straightened slowly and scanned the tree line. The storm had thickened, reducing visibility to a narrow tunnel of light. Nothing moved, no eyes reflected back at him. But Max had not relaxed. The dog's gaze remained fixed, ears angled forward, muscles taut beneath thinning fur. Robert closed the door, sealing the warmth back inside. He leaned his forehead briefly against the wood, eyes closed. This was how trouble always started, not with violence, but with something out of place. He stoked the fire, the flames snapping higher, casting long shadows across the walls lined with old photographs and a single framed badge tucked into a corner he rarely looked at. Max followed him, positioning himself near the door again, lying down but not resting. Robert sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee gone cold. His thoughts drifted, uninvited, to other nights, other doors. Back then, the tension had come with noise, radios crackling, boots pounding, commands shouted into chaos. Tonight, the mountain held its breath. Minutes passed, then more. A sound cut through the wind, soft, almost swallowed by the storm. Not a howl, not a bark, something weaker. Max's head snapped up. Robert stood at once, every nerve awake now. He pulled on his coat again, slipped into his boots and grabbed the flashlight. When he opened the door this time, he did not step out. He waited, scanning the snow just beyond the porch. At the edge of the light, two shapes hovered. They did not advance, they did not flee. Two wolves stood just beyond the porch, ribs faintly visible beneath matted winter coats, breath rising in shallow clouds. One held itself. Awkwardly, weight shifted off a hind leg that trembled under the strain. Their eyes caught the beam, amber, bright, and not hostile. There was no baring of teeth, no raised hackles, only exhaustion, raw and unmistakable. Robert's pulse thudded in his ears. Wolves were not supposed to do this. They did not approach human shelters. They did not wait. He stayed perfectly still. Years of training held him in place, mind racing even as his body froze. "Easy," he said, voice low, controlled. Not a command, an offering. The larger wolf shifted, placing itself half a step in front of the injured one. Protective, defensive, but not aggressive. The injured wolf's legs buckled slightly, its body swaying before it caught itself again. Max moved forward then, slow and deliberate, stopping beside Robert's leg. He did not growl. He did not charge. He simply stood there, a silent bridge between two worlds that were never meant to meet. Robert's thoughts collided. Policy, instinct, memory. He knew the rules. He knew the danger. He also knew what desperation looked like when it stripped away pride and left only survival behind. The wind surged again, snow hammering down harder now. The wolves did not retreat. Robert exhaled slowly, his breath shaking despite his control. "You're running out of options," he murmured, though he wasn't sure who he meant it for, them or himself. He did not invite them inside, not yet. He took one step back instead, leaving the door open, letting the warmth spill into the night. The fire crackled behind him, a fragile line against the cold. Max remained steady at his side. Out there, in the white chaos of the storm, the wolves waited, not as predators, not as symbols, but as living proof that even the wild could be driven to the edge. And for the first time in years, Robert Hale understood that winter had not finished asking things of him. The fire outside the cabin burned higher than Robert intended, flames snapping sharply as the wind tore at them, but he let it burn anyway, because warmth was the only thing he could offer without crossing a line he knew better than to ignore. The two wolves did not move closer. They stood just beyond the reach of the firelight, shapes half formed in swirling snow, their outlines sharpened only when the wind shifted and revealed ribs pressed tight beneath winter-thinned fur. The larger wolf was tall and long-limbed, its coat a mottled gray and charcoal, scarred in places where old fights had left their mark. It held itself upright despite the cold, head lifted, eyes never leaving Robert. The smaller wolf was younger, its build leaner, its fur darker along the spine, and it favored its right hind leg badly. Each attempt to shift weight sent a tremor through its body, a weakness it could no longer hide. Robert stayed where he was, boots planted just inside the threshold, door open behind him, warmth bleeding uselessly into the storm. He knew better than to step forward. He also knew better than to shut the door completely. Max stood at his side, unmoving. The German shepherd's posture was deliberate, head level, tail low, shoulders squared without aggression. Years earlier, during a barricaded suspect call that had ended with shattered glass and gunfire, Max had learned how to hold a line without provoking what stood on the other side. That discipline remained. His dark eyes tracked the wolves calmly, not as prey, not as threat, but as something that required attention and restraint. Robert bent slowly, keeping his movements visible, and placed a slab of frozen venison on the snow near the edge of the porch. He did not toss it. He did not slide it closer. He set it down and stepped back, increasing the distance between himself and the offering. His breath came slow, controlled, though his heart hammered harder than he liked to admit. "Your choice," he said quietly, voice nearly swallowed by the wind. The wolves did not rush forward. They waited, as if weighing risk against hunger. The larger one lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring, testing the air. The injured wolf shifted, nearly collapsing before bracing itself again, a low, involuntary sound escaping its throat, not a growl, not a plea, but the sound of something pushed beyond endurance. Robert felt it like a blow to the chest. He forced himself to look away, scanning the snow around the cabin instead. That was when he saw the other tracks. They cut across the wolf prints at an angle too straight, too deliberate to be animal. Human boot prints, deep and sharp-edged, the tread pattern partially visible despite the fresh snowfall. They came from the tree line and circled the cabin once before veering downslope. Whoever had made them hadn't lingered long, but long enough to look. Robert straightened slowly, every muscle tightening. These were not the rounded impressions of park rangers or the lighter marks of hikers. These were heavy boots, worn hard, the kind favored by men who spent long hours outdoors and didn't worry about being seen. He followed the trail a few feet with his eyes and spotted something else. A faint drag mark, almost erased by the wind, leading away from where the wolves now stood. Someone had chased them. Max caught the shift in Robert's posture immediately, his ears angled back, attention snapping away from the wolves and toward the darkness beyond the firelight. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, but a warning held in reserve. Robert raised a hand slightly, palm down. Easy. He retreated one step into the cabin and reached for the radio clipped near the door. Static answered him. The storm had swallowed the signal completely. Of course it had. Outside, the smaller wolf finally gave in to hunger. It limped forward one painful step at a time, head low, every movement cautious. The larger wolf stayed back guarding, eyes flicking between Robert, Max, and the tree line. Only when the injured wolf reached the meat did it relax by the smallest margin. The younger wolf ate quickly, tearing at the frozen flesh with desperation rather than grace. Blood stained the snow beneath its muzzle, steaming faintly in the cold. The larger wolf waited until the smaller one had taken its fill before approaching, a behavior that told Robert everything he needed to know about their bond. Family. The realization tightened something behind his ribs. He turned back into the cabin briefly, pulling on heavier gloves and grabbing a lantern. When he returned, he set the lantern on the porch floor, angled outward to widen the pool of light. He did not step down. He did not speak again. Minutes passed. The wind eased slightly as if pausing to watch. Then, from far down the slope, came a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a dull metallic clink, followed by a muffled voice carried just far enough to be heard, not far enough to be understood. The larger wolf froze. Its head snapped toward the sound, muscles bunching, teeth flashing for a heartbeat before it checked itself. The injured wolf tried to turn, failed, and sank heavily onto its haunches, sides heaving. Robert felt the old calculations slide into place automatically. Distance, visibility, cover. He scanned the slope again and spotted a faint glimmer, light, briefly shielded, then gone. Someone was moving carefully, someone who knew how not to be seen. Not a ranger. Robert closed the door halfway, leaving just enough of a gap for light and warmth to spill out. He knelt and rested a hand briefly on Max's broad neck, feeling the dog's steady breathing under his palm. "We're not doing anything stupid," he murmured, more promise than instruction. Max did not move. The voices drifted closer, then farther away, as if whoever was out there had decided not to approach the cabin directly. The wolves reacted immediately. The larger one nudged, the injured wolf with its muzzle urging it to rise. When the smaller wolf failed, panic flickered through both of them. They were trapped. Robert's jaw tightened. He understood corners. He understood what happened when fear had nowhere left to go. He grabbed another log and added it to the fire, then deliberately kicked snow over the older tracks near the porch, blurring the signs of recent movement. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way he had once moved through dark hallways to keep from drawing attention. The wolves watched him with eyes bright and unblinking. The injured wolf attempted to stand again and collapsed fully this time, chest hitting the snow hard enough to knock the breath from its lungs. It lay there, sides shuddering, unable to rise. The larger wolf let out a low, broken sound that cut through the wind. Robert inhaled sharply, pain flaring in his knee as he crouched. He did not reach for the wolf. He did not close the distance. Instead, he slid the remaining meat closer with the toe of his boot, then backed away again, widening the space between them in the dark beyond the firelight. "Stay," he whispered, though he knew the word was meaningless to them. Behind him, Max shifted, positioning his body so that he stood squarely between the wolves and the open doorway, a living barrier that communicated calm without invitation. The wolves did not challenge him. They did not flee. They stayed where the light was strongest, where the wind was weakest, where survival still had a chance. Somewhere downslope, a man laughed quietly. Another voice answered, irritated. Robert closed his eyes for half a second, cataloging options and discarding most of them. He could not confront anyone. He could not run them off. He could only wait and make this place unappealing enough to avoid curiosity. The voices faded again, swallowed by the storm. When Robert opened his eyes, the wolves were still there. So was the fire. So was the cold. And Robert Hale understood with a clarity that left no room for denial that the night had crossed a line none of them could step back over. The storm did not lessen. It tightened, as if the mountain had decided to test how much pressure a single night could apply before something broke. Robert Hale stood just inside the door, lantern light stretching across the porch and snow beyond it, watching the injured wolf struggle to breathe. The animal lay where it had fallen, sides shuddering in short, uneven pulls of air, amber eyes dulled by pain and exhaustion. The larger wolf remained close, pacing in a tight arc, its movements controlled but frantic beneath the surface. Every few seconds it lifted its head toward the tree line, nostrils flaring, ears rotating as if trying to listen through the wind for danger that would not announce itself. Robert's hands clenched inside his gloves. This was the point he had hoped the night would never reach, the place where distance stopped being enough, where observation turned into responsibility. He knew the rules. He had lived by rules for most of his life, but rules did not account for blood freezing into fur, for lungs pulling at air that would not warm, for a body giving out a few feet from shelter. Behind him, Max shifted his weight and let out a single low breath through his nose. Not a sound of alarm, a reminder. Robert crouched slowly, the familiar pain flaring along his knee and up into his hip. He ignored it. Pain had always been a negotiable thing. He studied the injured wolf carefully now, cataloging what he could see without touching. Tremors, shallow breathing, the angle of the hind leg twisted slightly outward. Not a fresh wound. Old damage, aggravated by cold and forced movement, possibly a trap injury, possibly worse. His mind slipped, unbidden, into old patterns. Years ago, on a winter night not unlike this one, Robert had knelt in a stairwell slick with melting snow and blood, pressing gauze against a man's thigh, while gunfire echoed 2 floors above. The man had been young, barely 30, eyes wide with the kind of fear training never fully erased. Robert had told him to breathe, to stay with him, to hold on. The man had nodded. He had still bled out before the medics arrived. That night had ended Robert's career in ways the paperwork never captured. Now, decades later, his hands remembered what his life had tried to forget. Robert rose and moved deliberately back into the cabin. He did not rush. Rushing got people hurt. He pulled open a metal cabinet near the sink and retrieved a small first aid kit, old, compact, the kind he kept for accidents with axes and frozen fingers. He added a clean towel, thick gloves, and a short length of wooden dowel he used for tending the fire. He hesitated, then grabbed a headlamp, strapping it on but leaving it off. When he returned to the doorway, the wolves watched him intently. The larger one stiffened when it saw the kit, lips pulling back just enough to show teeth. Robert stopped at once and raised both hands, palms out, keeping the distance unchanged. "I won't touch unless I have to," he said quietly, his voice steady but rough around the edges. "And if you tell me no, I listen." The words were ridiculous. He knew that. Still, they mattered. To him. Max stepped forward without being told, positioning himself slightly ahead and to the side of Robert, not as a threat but as a presence. His posture was calm, disciplined, the way it had been when he worked perimeter on cold nights, when chaos pressed in and someone had to hold the center. The larger wolf hesitated, then backed a single step away from the injured one, eyes never leaving Robert. It was not permission, it was calculation. Robert knelt again, this time at the very edge of the porch, not crossing into the snow. He extended the wooden dowel slowly and used it to pull the towel toward him, then slid the towel back out toward the injured wolf, stopping well short of its body. The wind carried his scent, his breath, the smoke from the fire. The injured wolf flinched when the towel brushed its foreleg, a thin sound tearing from its throat, but it did not lash out. It did not try to flee. It simply sagged further into the snow, too tired for anything else. That was the moment Robert understood he had already crossed the line he feared, not with his hands, but with his heart. He edged closer by inches, moving when the wind howled loudest to mask sound. He kept his body low, profile small, eyes soft but alert. With the dowel, he gently nudged the injured leg, testing response. The wolf snarled weakly, then went still again, breath hitching. No strength left. Robert swallowed and switched on the headlamp. Light flooded the space between them, harsh and immediate. The larger wolf reacted instantly, stepping forward with a sharp warning growl. Max answered with a single, controlled bark, short, firm, then silence. Not challenge, boundary. The wolves froze. Robert did not look at Max. He trusted him completely. He focused on the task in front of him, forcing his breathing into a slow rhythm. In, out, control what you can. He used the dowel to lift the wolf's fur gently, confirming swelling along the joint, skin raw and cracked from cold. No visible bleeding now. That was good. Infection was still a risk, but immediate death was not imminent, if the animal could be warmed. Robert backed away again, retreating to the porch. He stood there for a long moment, the weight of the decision settling over him. He could do more. He knew how. He also knew the risk. One sudden movement, one instinctive reaction, and this would end badly for all of them. Behind his eyes, another memory stirred. A night when he had hesitated too long, waiting for protocol, waiting for backup that never arrived in time. He exhaled slowly and reached down, removing one glove. His hand was scarred, knuckles thick, fingers stiff with age. He held it out where the injured wolf could see it, then placed it flat against the wood of the porch, still far from the animal. "I'm not here to own you," he said softly. "I'm here to keep you alive until morning." The larger wolf watched him for a long, measuring moment. Then, reluctantly, it lowered its head and stepped aside just enough to give the injured wolf a clearer path to the porch if it chose to take it. The injured wolf did not move. Robert did not push. Instead, he adjusted the fire, adding another log and shielding it slightly with his body so the heat rolled outward rather than straight up. The air near the porch warmed by degrees, subtle but real. Snow melted into slush at the threshold. Minutes dragged by. The wind screamed. Somewhere downslope, a branch snapped, sharp as a rifle crack. Max's head lifted, ears angling back toward the sound. Robert followed his gaze and saw it. A faint movement between trees, too deliberate to be wildlife. A shadow paused, then disappeared. The memory of the boot prints burned in his mind. They were still out there. Robert's jaw tightened. He could not stay kneeling here forever. He could not leave the wolves exposed. He could not confront anyone directly. The calculus spun, tight and unforgiving. He made his choice quietly. Robert rose, joints protesting, and reached inside to grab a heavy tarp and several lengths of rope. He returned and began anchoring the tarp to the porch railings, creating a low windbreak that blocked sightlines from downslope while trapping warmth near the ground. He worked slowly, methodically, every movement intentional. Max stayed glued to his side, watching the trees while Robert worked. The wolves watched too, tension easing slightly as the wind slackened around them. By the time Robert finished, the injured wolf lay within a pocket of relative calm, protected from the worst of the storm without being confined. It was not safety. It was a chance. Robert leaned back against the doorframe, chest tight, breath shallow. His hands shook now that the work was done. He pressed them together until the tremor passed. This night had stripped him bare in ways he hadn't expected. It had dragged old ghosts into the light and asked him to choose again, between distance and engagement, between survival and responsibility. Max moved closer, pressing his shoulder lightly against Robert's leg, solid and warm. Outside, the wolves stayed where they were. And Robert Hale understood, with a clarity that left him no room to retreat, that the past had not followed him into the mountains to punish him. It had come to see what he would do differently. The storm reached its peak just after midnight, not with a single dramatic blow, but with a steady, merciless pressure that felt designed to wear everything down until nothing was left standing. Snow no longer fell in flakes. It came sideways, dense and blinding, driven by a wind that howled through the trees and slammed against the cabin walls like a living thing demanding entry. The tarp Robert had rigged along the porch snapped and strained, its ropes groaning under the load. Every few minutes he stepped out to check the knots, fingers stiff and clumsy inside his gloves, breath tearing from his lungs in white bursts. This was not a night for bravery. It was a night for endurance. Robert Hale leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, letting his weight rest there for a moment longer than he should have. His body reminded him, quietly at first, then insistently, that he was no longer built for this. The old knee throbbed, the joints swollen and hot beneath layers of wool and denim. His lower back burned with a familiar deep ache, the kind that came from too many years wearing heavy armor and moving fast when fear demanded it. In his SWAT days, pain had been something you pushed through because others depended on you. Tonight, there was no team, no perimeter, no medic waiting just out of sight. Just him, an old dog, and two wild animals clinging to survival on the edge of his porch. Max stayed close, as he had all night. The German shepherd lay near the threshold, his body angled toward the darkness, ears twitching constantly as the wind carried sound in broken pieces. His breathing was steady but heavy, the rise and fall of his chest slower than it used to be. When Robert shifted too abruptly, Max lifted his head at once, eyes searching his handler's face, reading for weakness, for intention. "I'm fine," Robert muttered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. Outside, the injured wolf lay curled awkwardly, its body pressed against the ground as if trying to disappear into the earth itself. Frost clung to the fur along its flank, glittering faintly when the lantern light caught it. The larger wolf remained standing despite the storm, legs braced wide, head lowered against the wind. It refused to lie down, refused to rest, guarding its companion with a vigilance that bordered on desperation. Robert watched them from just inside the door, chest tight. He had seen men do this once, stand watch long after exhaustion had hollowed them out, driven by something deeper than orders, loyalty, fear, love. The words blurred together in the dark. A sudden gust tore at the tarp, ripping one corner free with a sharp crack that sounded too much like a gunshot. The injured wolf startled violently, trying to scramble up and failing. The larger wolf spun, teeth bared, eyes flashing toward the noise. Max reacted instantly, stepping forward and planting himself squarely between the wolves and the open doorway. He did not bark this time. He simply stood there, body calm, posture unwavering, broadcasting a message without sound. Nothing is attacking you. The larger wolf hesitated, then slowly lowered its head again. Robert moved despite the pain, limping forward to secure the loose corner of the tarp. As he reached for the rope, his foot slid on ice hidden beneath fresh snow. He went down hard, knee striking the porch edge with a dull, bone-jarring impact that knocked the breath from his lungs. For a moment, all he could see was white. Max was on him instantly, pressing his weight against Robert's side, not panicked but urgent, steadying him. Robert clenched his jaw, forcing air back into his chest, the pain blooming hot and bright. He stayed down longer than pride allowed, letting the worst of it pass. "This is what you get for pretending you're still 40, he rasped to no one. The larger wolf watched the scene intently, ears pricked forward, head tilted slightly. When Robert finally pushed himself upright, the animal did not retreat. It simply observed, eyes tracking every movement, as if recalculating the strange, fragile creature standing between it and the storm. Robert tied the tarp off again, slower now, movements careful and economical. When he finished, he retreated into the cabin and shut the door most of the way, leaving only a narrow gap for light and warmth. He leaned his forehead briefly against the wood, eyes closed, breath ragged. This was the part no one ever talked about, not the charge, not the rescue, not the moment that made good headlines. This, the waiting, the doubt, the slow erosion of strength, was where things were decided. He thought again of the man in the stairwell years ago, of the blood on his hands and the radio crackling uselessly while time ran out. Back then, Robert had believed heroism was about action, about moving forward no matter the cost. Tonight taught him something different. Heroism, if it existed at all, looked a lot like restraint. The wind carried voices again, closer this time. Robert stiffened, every sense sharpening despite the fatigue. He killed the lantern at once, plunging the porch into shadow. The fire still glowed low, banked carefully to avoid throwing light too far. The wolves reacted immediately. The larger one shifted position, angling its body between the injured wolf and the darkness beyond the tarp. Its lips curled back in a silent warning. Robert crouched behind the door, peering through the narrow gap. Shapes moved down slope, 2, maybe 3 figures, bulky in winter gear, heads close together as they spoke. A flashlight blinked on briefly, then off again, its beam cutting a pale line through the storm before vanishing. They were close enough now that Robert could smell them faintly. Oil, sweat, tobacco, poachers. His jaw tightened until it ached. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to step out, to make his presence known. Once that instinct had been backed by a badge and a team in the law. Now it was just muscle memory and anger. He did nothing. Instead, he reached down and placed a hand on Max's back, fingers curling into thick fur. The dog leaned into the touch, grounding him. Robert focused on breathing slowly, quietly, letting the storm mask every sound. The men paused near the tree line, silhouettes barely visible. One of them gestured toward the cabin, arm lifting briefly before dropping again. Another shook his head. They spoke too softly for words to carry, but the tone was clear. Debate, calculation. The injured wolf shifted and let out a small, involuntary sound. The larger wolf froze. Robert's heart slammed against his ribs. He pressed his palm harder against Max's back, a silent plea for stillness. Max held. Seconds stretched unbearably thin. Then, just as abruptly as they had come, the figures turned away, their shapes dissolving into the white chaos of the storm. The faint crunch of boots faded, swallowed by wind and distance. Robert did not move for a long time. When he finally allowed himself to breathe fully again, the relief was sharp enough to hurt. He sank down onto a chair just inside the door, muscles trembling, exhaustion crashing over him in a heavy wave. Max crossed the threshold then, just enough to rest his head against Robert's knee, eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the crack in the door. Robert rested his hand on the dog's broad skull, fingers tracing familiar scars, grounding himself in something real and solid. Outside, the wolves remained. The injured one had shifted closer to the porch now, drawn by the faint warmth that leaked from inside. Its breathing had steadied, though each breath still looked like work. The larger wolf finally lay down beside it, body curved protectively around its companion, eyes half-lidded but alert. They had chosen to stay. Robert watched them through the gap, his vision blurring slightly from fatigue and emotion he did not care to name. He understood now that this night was not about saving anyone. It was about holding a fragile line until morning came, about not making things worse through pride or impulse. There would be no medals for this, no stories told over drinks, just survival, measured in hours. He shifted carefully, easing his injured knee, and pulled a blanket around his shoulders. Max settled at his feet, sighing softly, the sound heavy with age and trust. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent and relentless. Inside, a man who had once believed heroes charged forward learned the harder truth. that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay exactly where you were and endure the night. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in cautiously, pale light seeping through thinning clouds as the storm finally loosened its grip on the mountains. Robert Hale woke in the chair by the door, neck stiff, knee throbbing dully, Max's warm weight pressed against his shin. The fire had burned down to a bed of embers, and the wind outside no longer howled. It whispered, carrying the softer sounds of settling snow and distant branches shedding ice. He stayed still for a moment, listening. Silence this time felt earned. He rose carefully, testing his knee before putting full weight on it, then eased the door open. Cold air slid in, sharp but no longer cruel. Outside, the tarp still held, sagging under a crust of snow. Beyond it, the two wolves lay close together. The injured one's breathing was steadier now, less frantic, each rise of its chest a small victory. The larger wolf lifted its head at Robert's movement, eyes alert but not alarmed, then settled again, conserving energy the way only wild animals knew how to do. Robert knelt, wincing, and banked the fire to push warmth outward. He did not speak. He let the morning do what words could not. Max stepped onto the porch and paused, tail low, posture neutral. The larger wolf acknowledged him with a brief glance, no challenge, no fear, then returned its attention to the tree line. Somewhere deep in Robert's chest, a knot loosened. They had made it through the night. He turned back inside and reached for the satellite phone he kept for emergencies, fingers stiff as he extended the antenna. The signal came back slowly, then steadied. He waited until the connection was clear before speaking, voice measured and precise, the way it had been on countless calls long ago. He reported the boot prints, the lights, the voices, the wolves' condition, the location. He gave coordinates twice. He asked for wildlife officers and rangers, not deputies, not volunteers. When the call ended, he exhaled and set the phone down, hands shaking just enough to notice. Time stretched again, but differently now. The sun climbed, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Robert brought out more water, setting the bowl where the injured wolf could reach it without standing. He slid another portion of meat across the snow and retreated. The larger wolf waited until Robert stepped back before allowing the injured one first access, a ritual of patience that spoke of bonds older than fences or roads. Footsteps crunched in the distance shortly after noon, careful, deliberate, accompanied by the low hum of an engine idling somewhere downslope. Max stiffened, ears forward, then looked back at Robert. Robert raised a hand. Easy. The first person to appear from the trees was a woman in her early 40s, tall and lean, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to rough ground. Her parka was dark green, patched and weathered, the insignia of the State Wildlife Service stitched over her left shoulder. Knit cap held back auburn hair pulled into a practical braid that rested against her collar. Her skin was wind-burned, her face angular, eyes a clear gray that missed little. She carried herself without hurry, hands visible, posture open. Experience, not bravado. "Robert Hale?" she called, stopping well short of the porch. "That's me," Robert replied, stepping into view. "I'm Sarah Whitcomb," she said. "Wildlife officer. We got your report." Her gaze moved briefly to the wolves, then back to Robert. There was concern there, and respect. "You did the right thing calling when you did." Two others followed at a distance, men in similar gear, quieter, older than rookies, their movements economical. They stayed back, assessing, giving space. Professionals. Sarah approached slowly, crouching when she reached the edge of the porch, careful not to crowd the animals. "They're exhausted," she said softly, mostly to herself. "That leg's been bad for a while." "I didn't touch them," Robert said. "Kept distance, heat and time." She nodded once. "That's exactly right." They worked methodically. Sarah explained each step before it happened, her voice calm, steady. A light sedative delivered by dart, measured, minimal. Blankets slid beneath the injured wolf without lifting it more than necessary. The larger wolf bristled briefly, then eased when Max remained still, when Robert stayed put. Trust, built inch by inch, held. As they prepared a sled, Sarah glanced at Robert's knee. "You're hurt." "Nothing new," he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite land. She studied him for a second longer, then looked back to the wolves. "We'll take them to the reserve," she said. "Treat the injury properly. When the weather breaks and she's strong enough, we'll release them back into their territory." Robert nodded. He had known the words were coming. Knowing did not make them lighter. The wolves were secured gently, the larger one maintaining contact until the last possible moment, a living shield even as sedation softened its resistance. When they finally moved downslope, the sled gliding smoothly over packed snow, Robert stood on the porch with Max at his side and watched until the trees swallowed them whole. The mountains felt suddenly vast again. Sarah lingered, jotting notes, then closed her notebook. "We'll be back through here in a few days," she said. "Check for traps, patrol the area. Those tracks you saw. You probably saved more than 2 lives by calling." Robert looked out at the empty snow where the wolves had been. "I just didn't make it worse," she smiled faintly. "That's more than most." When the vehicles finally disappeared, Robert returned inside and shut the door. The cabin seemed quieter than it had in years. He cleaned up slowly, every movement deliberate, Max following him from room to room, nails clicking softly on the floor. At the window, Robert paused, resting his palm against the cold glass. The storm had erased most of the tracks now, leaving only smooth white and the promise of melt. Days later, the weather softened. Sunlight lingered longer on the slopes. Robert received a brief message from Sarah, photos of the wolves in a large enclosure, the injured leg bandaged cleanly, healing well. The larger wolf stood close, as it always had. Together. Robert printed the photo and placed it on the shelf beside the old badge, not as a trophy, as a reminder. He returned to his routines, wood, repairs, quiet mornings with coffee and Max at his feet. But the silence no longer pressed so hard. Winter had asked its questions. He had answered the only way he knew how now, with restraint, patience, and a willingness to stay. On a clear afternoon, Max lifted his head and wagged his tail once, slow and sure, as if approving the turn of things. Robert laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. Outside, snowmelt trickled down the mountain, carrying the last of the storm away. Somewhere beyond the trees, the wolves would run again, free and whole, their path crossing his life for a single night and leaving it changed. Winter had let go, and Robert Hale, finally, had learned to do the same. In the quiet after the storm, when the snow finally loosens its grip and the world exhales, we're reminded that miracles don't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they come softly, in the form of strength we didn't know we still had, compassion we almost forgot how to give, or a moment when God places a choice in our hands and waits to see who we will be. Robert didn't part the mountains or defeat the night. He simply stayed. He chose restraint over fear, mercy over indifference. And in doing so, he became part of something larger than himself. That is often how God works in our everyday lives, not through grand gestures, but through small, faithful decisions made when no one is watching. Each of us will face our own winter seasons, moments when life feels cold, isolating, and unforgiving. And yet, those are often the moments where purpose is reborn, where we learn that holding the line, showing up, and choosing kindness can change everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs. Leave a comment with where you are watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps. And thank you so much for being here.